Welcome to another edition of Confident Real Estate. I'm your host, JC, and in today's video, we're going to discuss the importance of understanding how subleasing works and how surrender agreements work in your residential properties, in case you have a tenant that you signed a lease with who suddenly wants to sublease all, or maybe just a room of that property to some other person that you don't know, and have that person in your property. Or maybe they want to move out early and you're willing to let them out, or maybe they want to move into a bigger unit that you own and you want to let them out of the lease with that smaller unit, but you maybe missed the importance of a surrender agreement, which is crucial to facilitating that process of ending a lease early. So today we're going to cover both in a real quick video that gets down to the brass tacks of how surrender agreements and subleases really operate. And of course, hit that like button for the YouTube algorithm, please. And if you haven't yet joined our Confident Real Estate family, I don't know what you're waiting for. The subscribe button is right there. First, we're going to start with subleases. Pros and cons. The pros of a sublease are that they allow your tenant, who maybe can't afford the rent on their own, to bring in another person. Maybe they had a change in their job. Maybe they were a couple, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, fiance, couple, engaged, and it didn't work out. They need to bring somebody else in order to pay the rent that they owe you every single month pursuant to that lease that they signed with you. Especially if you enter into a situation where you have maybe a husband and wife and the wife doesn't have a job, so only the husband actually qualified based on income and credit score to be on the lease, and maybe you didn't add the wife and it's just the husband on the lease, or maybe the lease was always in the name of a boyfriend and suddenly he had a girlfriend move in, they got engaged, and the rent's gone up year over year, and now the girlfriend is no longer in the picture, and maybe his job circumstance or financial circumstances based on that breakup are in a dire position, and they need to sublease either all of the unit and get out of it and get somebody else to take over their lease, or sublease a room, a portion of the unit, so that they can have somebody else contributing towards that rent. You as the landlord have a decision to make. Do you allow the sublease, or do you terminate the agreement altogether and do a surrender agreement? Now, there's certain ways this can work out. A sublease can be beneficial if they're going to bring somebody in who makes more money than they do, has great credit, becomes a great tenant. Maybe in that situation, if the person who's bringing in that extra tenant doesn't really want to be there anymore, you release them from the lease with a surrender agreement so that that new person can come in and be your sole tenant. There are lots of advantages to it. If you live in an area that really focuses on student housing, do you want somebody to sign a lease with you, have their parent perhaps be the co-signer because they're the one who's really making the income while their child who's living there goes to school at a nearby campus, and then suddenly they start subleasing your unit to their friends who maybe aren't as clean or kind to your property as the initial person was, and of course you don't have co-signers for those kids also guaranteeing the lease payments. Those are things you need to work out. If you're going to permit a sublease, then you have to make sure you have people who are qualified to live there, or in the case of the student housing, have co-signers who are qualified to pay the rent for the student that's living there. And of course, you have to have in your lease, as most standard form leases do, a provision that says subleasing and assigning that lease are strictly prohibited unless you as the landlord allow it. So, subleases can be beneficial, but they can also be very detrimental to you and the value of your property. So that gets us into how to enter into a surrender agreement if the situation is just not working for you and your tenant any longer. Surrender agreements, they're a necessary tool that you should absolutely be aware of. What they are, how they work, and how you use them for the different situations you may find yourself in with your residential rental property. If you own a property and you want to go sell it, but maybe you have below market rents, or the person who wants to buy it wants to come in and totally redo the property. They can't do that if you have tenants in there. So they may say to you, I want you to sell me that property, but you have to promise to deliver it vacant. Well, in that case, you need to enter into surrender agreements with all of your tenants, where they're surrendering the property and leaving with all of their stuff, and maybe they're getting a little bit of money for doing so prior to the expiration of their lease term that they currently have active with you. But you may also, like I said before, find yourself in a situation where you have a tenant and it's just not working out for them and for you. It's easier for you to get rid of them and go find a better tenant. Or perhaps they've been there for a while and you've been increasing rents, but you're maybe still below where the market is, because if they left, you could get somebody in at a market rate rent by doing some repainting and freshening up the unit, and that's more advantageous to you. So in that situation, it behooves you to enter into a surrender agreement and get that tenant out of there, so you can go out and get another better qualified tenant and make more money every month on the new rental agreement. So the way a surrender agreement works, it's very simple, and of course I'm going to tell you right here and now, you got to go out and find your own real estate attorney who's going to help guide you in the process, because every state and jurisdiction is different, and there might be little laws and different nuances that are particular to where your property is that may not be particular to where the properties I own are. So go out and get a real estate attorney who's qualified to enter into and draft you a surrender agreement for you to enter into with your tenant. But a surrender agreement in its essence is a early termination of a lease and a surrender of the property, of the unit that that tenant is in. And I can tell you, I personally just did this recently because I had a property that had a large 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment, and the other apartments in the property were all 1, 2-bedroom apartments. They weren't quite as large. When that 4-bed, 2-bath apartment went on the market, tenants in the building noticed, and there was a family in the building that said, we want to move up there. And they qualified. We did the background check. They were already great tenants. I knew they paid their rent on time. I knew they took good care of my property. So I said, you know what? Let's do it. You can move up, and now you're going to pay me $600 extra a month more than you currently pay on this lease. But before I can lease this unit that you currently occupy, this 2-bedroom unit, I need you to enter into a surrender agreement, because technically, legally, they would be in a lease for the upstairs apartment and a lease for the apartment they were in downstairs that was only a 2-bedroom apartment. Now, do they want to pay rent on both apartments? Of course not. But God forbid they get upstairs and realize, you know what, this is a little bit of a stretch for us. We can't afford it. We want to go back to that apartment. Do I have a surrender agreement from them, or do I have a lease with them for that apartment? Do you really want to be in that situation where you say I have 2 leases for 2 different apartments with the same tenant, and they're not qualified to rent both of them from an income standpoint? So who's the fool in that situation? It's me as the landlord. So I had them enter into a surrender agreement for the smaller apartment at the same time they signed the lease for the upstairs apartment and moved on up. And that allowed me to go out and rent that smaller apartment. And guess what? Because they were a long-standing tenant that had only been subject to incremental rent increases, I was able to go and rent that smaller apartment for quite a bit more than they were paying me at that time. So I got more money for the upstairs apartment and more money for one of the apartments downstairs, and all I needed to do was enter into a surrender agreement at the same time I entered into a new lease. So be aware of how these work. And there are plenty of templates you can find online that will give you an idea of how they work. If you want a template, hit me up down below and I will send you a base form that you could look at. But again, you gotta hire your own real estate attorney to represent you before you enter into any kind of agreement with anybody. Always. As always, I appreciate you watching all the way to the end. Smash that like button if you didn't do it already. I hope you got some beneficial content out of this video. That's the point of me doing all of these videos. I want to share my experience and expertise with you because, quite honestly, I watch a lot of YouTube videos myself because I can always learn more. I may have been doing this for over a decade as an investor, as an attorney, but I can always learn more from the rest of you. That's what this whole YouTube community is about. So if you're not yet a member, hit subscribe, join this Confident Real Estate family, just like I join and follow so many of the other channels that are out there. Some of yours, if you're watching, you know who you are because I comment on your videos too. And again, keep watching. I appreciate you. Until next time.